So let me once more reiterate my sincere gratitude that you all came here to this conference. It is, for me, very rewarding and humbling experience to see you all here and to be so willing to participate in these discussions. So the title of my paper reads The Inter-Vocality of the Social. And before I begin, I would just like to stress that it's a work in progress. Hopefully it will progress somewhere. The contribution to the conference discussions I would like to present, and indeed quite literally represent here and now, today and before you, is, if anything, an essayistic attempt at a reconsideration of the phenomenon of voice, which I had years ago already sought to elaborate in a published paper, but which I had since then, contrary to my wishes, been able to pursue further merely intermittently and sporadically. So it is a sort of a recapitulation of thought in order to scrutinize if such a rethinking can be somehow subsequently capitalized, or should it rather, as all presumptuous and all too sumptuous intellectualist capitalism, be decapitated, so resigned to surrendering its capitulation. If I nonetheless maintain that it may warrant and be worthy of another, albeit repetitive, motivic and thematic variation of a renewed contemplative return, I lately, as I must readily admit, finding, or better, losing myself adrift amidst the confusing, resurging academic oceans, would wish to recommence the discontinued path through the previously only provisionally outlined research field by submitting the uncertainty of its potentiality with concordance to the notion propounded by Professor Plotka, the notion of co-philosophizing, to a kind of quote-unquote collective reassessment. So I would sincerely be most grateful for any and all kindly provided pointers, suggestions and waymarks which could help me refine the orientation and the trajectory of the proposed endeavor. What follows, therefore, is, if anything, solely a sort of philosophical, perchance even, that would be the hope, phenomenological prelude that, being of a summarily preliminary, precursory character, tentatively touching the boundary threshold of the course yet to be taken, but a course which has already been begun, offers nothing conclusive, but instead aspires to persevere with and through the correspondence of the openness, the open-endedness of questioning and self-questioning. The realm of social and sociable coexistence, resting to the largest degree on multifarious, forever and ever-changing forms of communication, that is to say, the mediation, and now in the postmodern, all-encompassing, technoscientifically facilitated world, mediatization of the singularly and collectively experienced. So the mutually communal world almost cannot be conceived of without the medium of voice. From before birth, from the parental conversations echoing distantly within the sheltering interiority of the initiative womb, to after death, to the words whispering with the air in the final proximity of exposed exteriority, accompanying not only ordinary existence, but also determining exceptional moments in the solitary as well as solidary, private as well as public lives of individuals and communities, the enigmatic, polyvalent and complex, and one could even say in the abysmal elusiveness of its fundamental essentiality, a phenomenon of voice, even per negationem in the extreme of speech or hearing impairment, co-constitutes, although often overheard but still entreating a hearkening, never and ever listen to the effectuation, that is to say, the self-realization of human and humane being in the world. The vocal dimension of dwelling, its vocality, can be and is encountered in innumerable situations and circumstances, not only in its originary verbality, but also in metaphorical transfiguration. The varied, intensively and extensively diversified engagement or the usage of the intermediating function of voice embraces, on the one hand, the mundane, unobvious or obvious spontaneity of quite quotidian dialogical exchange of opinions, as we say, or of increasingly inane broadcasting of information, as well as, on the other hand, the challenging elaboration of justice in the legal proceedings of a courtroom trial, or the demanding dissemination of knowledge, as we also very learnedly say, in the education process in a schoolroom setting. Whereas it seems impossible to imagine the historicity of nations and the wide-ranging the widespread ramifications and reception of certain, if not all, forms of art, predominantly, however, of course, popular as well as elite music and literature, beyond at least the collaboration of the vocal, its political formulation or transformulation offers opportunity to lift or lend, coincidentally, for a cause, one's voice as it is often proclaimed, during periodically unstable reenactments of the declaratively guaranteed but continually endangered right to vote in democratic elections. So here I play on the connection between, I think in a lot of Slavic languages, but certainly in Slovenian language, between voice, glas, music, glasba, and voting, glasovanje. So yet the self-assertive, self-assuming boundaries of wholly worldly immanence receive the outline of a provisionary sketch through the, perchance transcendently, etching, resounding of the innermost, hollowing voice of consciousness exhorting from within towards ethical action, and, on the other hand, the outermost hallowing voice of God, summoning from without towards religious devotion. So, sort of like an attempt to describe the vast area where voice can be encountered. So, in accordance with the briefly drafted and asserted affluence of the manifold reoccurrences of voice, and also of voice in the metaphorical sense, an equally heterogeneous array of all kinds of sciences and as well as proficiencies of other professions could be consulted to discuss specific separate aspects, if not the entirety of the phenomenon of vocality. So beside the above fleetingly indicated communication theories and media studies, beside jurisprudence, pedagogy, and aesthetics or musicology, besides sociology or politology, ethics, and religiology, wherein voice may play a prominent, perhaps even pivotal, but sometimes somewhat underestimated part, one could consult also anatomy and physics. They would provide indispensable detailed insight into physiological production and acoustical diffusion, whilst on the other hand, anthropological and ethnographical research, supplemented and complemented by, for example, linguistics and psychology, would contextually illuminate the value of vocality amongst peoples and nations of the world through the intercultural expansion of interpretive horizons. So the confluence and influence of the immense, the almost immeasurable knowledge, thus, once it could be attained if it could be attained at all, would irrefutably proffer a profound, well-grounded, and also well-rounded platform, also for an attempt at a potentially philosophical, phenomenological consideration of voice, which would, of course, have to take into consideration also the highly stratified polymorphous tradition of metaphysical and anti-metaphysical thought. However, rather than taking on this immense task of an immediate, direct approach towards the question of phenomenon of voice, so rather than simply asking what a voice or the voice is, the subsequent deliberation, drawing from the writings of Bernhard Waldenfels concerning responsive rationality, shall, without any tendency for exhaustiveness, seek to circumscribe an indirect, mediated, or as Waldenfels calls it, lateral, that is to say, sidewise and crosswise pathway through the problem to voice through the problem of listening. What can it then mean to listen to not only my own, the appropriated inner, perhaps, but also the alienated, strange, and outer other's voice, to hearken to it, to hear it. In an art of an approximative, so to speak, experimental and heuristic meditation, presumptively recapitulating essential emphases of Waldenfels' theoretical stance regarding responsive listening, I will, with concentration, endeavoring I will place and transpose myself, for I cannot do, or maybe I can do otherwise, with concentration endeavoring to expound upon the dimension of voice into one of the most commonly, generally and universally, but nonetheless every time solely singularly experienced dialogical, interpersonal of situations, so into the circumstances of a conversation. Whether I may be debating issues of intimate, ardently alluring concern, perhaps in the closed, half-confined space of a downtown quiet, quaint cafe, talking about our views on the artistry of poetry with a friend, or perhaps with my wife, chit-chatting about the course of our everyday life in the airy, half-open space of a suburban, balmily breezy balcony of our home, or whilst at a railway station impatiently awaiting the train to arrive, plainly replying to a passing stranger's simple request to check my watch for time, I encounter the unsurprising or surprising event, the unpredictable and predictable advent of a voice of the other, or even the voice of the other, to which the or a voice of mine is provoked to respond. As a needle threaded with language piercing, that is to say, tearing asunder at the same time, and also sewing up through the retrogradely re-established, often awkwardly stifling outer or inner stillness, whereto, of course, the ceaselessly rambling and rumbling noise of the surrounding world progressively altogether subsides during the interweaving movement of words that seizes the scene but has already begun before it starts once more in an always already renewed, indefinite, indeterminable continuation. Yet this confoundedly tactile, even textile, a sort of veil of voices enveloping the development of a conversation and their interplay maintaining relational proximity amongst internally included participants, as well as the relative remoteness of the partially excluded externality, withstands, with its fragility and with its fragmentariness, despite and in the face of the possibility of disintegrative destructuration. Confronted with the matter at hand, voices brought about through it, impressing upon it their expression, although the slightest of interferences, perhaps a foreigner's comically intricate accent in the struggle with pronunciation, or the abrupt outburst of an earnestly unsettling dispute with a vendor in the street, can cause, attracting attention, the wandering and the wandering meander of a sudden detour, a short pause or a long break, the retracing or retracting emendation of a strenuous recommencement. So the voices in agitations rise or in appeasement fall. They lead to a concluding agreement or to a final altercation. Encourage towards boundless proliferation or crumble towards desolate muteness. But a voice I listen to is not the voice I hear, and the voice I hear is not the voice I listen to. A voice being not just but also language, being not just but also sound. However, the voice which interpellates me, so which calls me in a sense, calls me forth, the address of which calls an intent, an intentional hearkening, is never a straightforward, never an ideal enunciation of self-evident and self-sufficient sense. A voice is neither just the insignificant sounding nor just the inaudible meaning of words, but taking part in the materiality of bodily concreteness as well as in the immateriality of spiritual abstractness, both at once, in their mutual permission and in their simultaneous infiltration. The immaterial, unabolishable, and unavoidable resonances represent as signs, as signals, splinters of the senseful in the illegibility and legibility of its connotated meaning. Each and every voice is, with the modulations and the modifications, the dynamics of its vibrant transformations, situated in the in-between of the intermediate, on the borderline between, on the one hand, what, as persevering in the unknown, inexplicable, and unrecognizable, the distant, the alien, which no reason and no reasoning can really grasp, and on the other hand, what through the answer of hearing as a constitutive, construing inactivation of voice, becomes understandable as rendered into the close, recognizable, inexplicable, the known, the own. So a voice speaks to us, you and I, bespeaks us, me and you. Every and each voice takes place on the borderline of sense and nonsense, so it's always in between. It is a medium of their mutual mediation. It is, I would say, a nonsense. So, in my understanding, vocality has this haunting dimension of a call of the sirens. In a sense, it's always in between, always traveling, in a sense. The gift of voice is an incision into silence. It is a rupture. In silence, it converts into sound, and on the precarious pathway of the consonant voyage, slowly passing away, ultimately reverts to silence. The departure point of the voice lies in the other. It comes to us from elsewhere, and in listening to it, enters, sometimes, of course, violently shrill, other times mildly scarce, our ears are hearing. It gives itself to us to be comprehended. It gives itself to comprehend. So the echoing sounding and the resounding echo voice itself recovers, this closes it, and at the same time encloses its origins. Whilst it abandons, leaves it behind, it nonetheless also deposits and inhabits its own, its strange spatial and temporal mark. A voice, I would say that it's sort of like it's the one thing that sort of situates me in the world. But it always, at the same time, as it is always itself displaced, it also displaces me out of it. So, sort of that's sort of try to go against any possibility of a reproach of a phonocentrism. As I understand, voice is always decentered. So the origin of voice, even in the case of my unalienable, my unalienated voice. So the voice, my own voice, that is, of course, especially if we hear it recorded, that's strange. It's always so strange to hear oneself recorded. So the voice never fully and totally, the origin of voice never fully and totally coincides with the instant and the location where and when it is being listened to, being heard. And so far as it travels through space and transverses it, passes through time and traverses it, in itself always, it is in itself always displaced. It's always dissimilar in itself. It unveils its origin into silence. It secretes it and keeps it secret, to use a Derridian term. The itinerant, the errant voice, as an echo of itself, is a temporalization and the specialization of the time and of the space and the time of the world, as opening through its this, I would call it anarchically decentered mirror. Anarchically, I write it with there's not, the point is not like some sort of naive anarchism, but precisely to try to think that where the arche, where it breaks itself so to try to think that the unbinding and the binding of the hyphen that comes in between. So, and here comes a quote from Waldenfels, from an essay, Laut werdende Stimme. This is my translation, so I quote: Voice does not precede experience, it is voiced in the experience. Therefore, it proves to be a broken, ripped, ruptured voice. It is surrounded by previous sounds and resonances, accords and discords. It is an echo of itself. This originary resounding of voice resists being domesticated in a simple monotony or homophony, which amalgamates everything in a single or a common voice. At the same time, it also withdraws the well-known oppositions, such as time and space, the enlivened and the inanimate, the own and the alien, action and passion, person and thing, autonomy and representation, the heard and the unheard, end quotation. The motion and even the emotion of vocality is a continually fluctuating, transmuted and transmutated oscillation between the semantic layers and the sonorous qualities of language, their undissolvable interweaving on the margins of nonsense, which it, in itself born of breath and born by breath, bears. It's sort of like it's at the same time the chiasmus and the hiatus between them. So it denotes a heterochrony and a heterotopia. The voice is sort of like a denomination, denotes this heterochrony and heterotopia of the world, and can only be received and perceived at the crossroads of its own being another, its own speaking differently, its own speaking indifferences, its own otherness. The alterity, or one could call it the alternativity, the unabiding of sense and nonsense within and without human voice, allows us to give audience and to be granted an audience, a belonging and a longing beyond obedience to the unheard through the heard, which imbues voice with the character of an event. And again, I quote from Waldenfels. This is from his lectures. On the phenomenology of the living body, das Leibliche selbst. Quote, voice is the unheard event of being heard, of finding a hearing. He uses the word des Gehörtwerdens, des Gehörtfindens. It is not merely an acoustic resonance within a world or heard given dates. Therefore, it follows that listening means responding, that it listens to something even before it hears and understands something as something. End quotation. Responsive listening is a response to the address, the appeal, and the claim. I call that. I write that as interappellation. So it's something that appeals us and also interpellates us, in the sense that it calls us to respond. So this appeal and the claim of the voice is, according to Waldenfels, demarked by the twofold, temporally and spatially diastatic movement of precedence of the address beyond reach and subsequence of the response, which is beyond recompense. Attentively gives and takes heed to and of the polyphony of the own and the alien in the mutuality of interpermission. And I quote another from another book by Waldenfels, Vielstimmigkeit der Rede. I quote, the polyphony begins by the duplication and the multiplication of voice itself, by the circumstance that speech deviates from itself, supersedes and overtakes itself, that it is never completely by itself but always already outside. End quotation. The polyphonic resounding of voice is one of the figures, or maybe one of the prefigurations of the extraordinary, which eludes all order and all ordering, defies its nets, precedes and supersedes, surpasses and passes through it, occurs as the singularly plural and as the plurally singular, which therefore causes the estrangement of experience and gives itself, whilst being listened to the heard, to be heard only indirectly through and as the unheard. So again, with the hyphen unheard, on the border and on the borders of various orders. Thus, for Waldenfels, also philosophy and poetry, or art and the arts in general, fulfill the function of intervening interrupture, Störfunktion, bringing about innovative responses to the address and the addresses of the alien by the anomalizing interplay of the extraordinary that prevents the processes of normalization to render dull the sting of the alien. Yet, are we are we not thus, as the multivalent, multifocal dimension, maybe the measure of voice, brings us from within our distance closer to the world, brings it, the world, from within its distance closer to us, without establishing a bridge over the unsurmountable gap, confronted through the communicative intermediality of the vocal, also with something, perhaps a thing or a nothing, that cannot be consummately mediated, that obstinately and enduringly rejects all mediation and mediatization, that not only withdraws and entices as the immediate, but furthermore as the immediable, as the arrhythmic impulse of existence, reveals itself only through the extraordinary ruptures of its regular, regulated flow. Then, there, where and when voice, derailing into giggling laughter or into trembling weeping, perforating atmosphere with shrieking cries, waning in vain with overwhelming deafness, once, and perhaps for all, when this voice lost fails. And how many whose voices are, whilst one voice speaking like mine dares to resound, how many voices are and whose voices are falling towards the breathlessness of a muteness without return at the moment, at this very moment, everywhere. Thank you. So, yeah. Yeah, so, should I? So, okay, yeah, please, Christian.
This topic it's very, very dense, the voice, it's very nice. Gewissen from Parliament. And I was surprised about what you said about the glass. In your language is music and voting. Mm-hmm. And it's maybe perhaps it does the same thing. It's of course you raise your voice to show your option to vote like this. Yeah. And the same. It's but in the word English word vote and all the coming from votum is not. It's the vow is the promise is the will. So if in your language is a more spatial ordering. As a Stimme, Bestimmung, it's an order, it's a special, like a special order. In Latin, all the language that took vote from the Latin, from votum, it's a more temporal, it's the future, the promise, the vow. It's interesting like this, to see how the language articulate different views about that.
Yeah.
And that was why I thought you can come on if you want. But also in voice, when I hear your voice, when I hear what are you saying, I hear your voice or I hear what are you saying? You're saying, please Christy, go home, or I hear your voice. There's a double stratum. One is understanding, and one is the Befindlichkeit, is the feeling. I feel your angry voice or your baritonal voice, your undisposed voice. So I think it's also interesting to see, to analyze the double aspect, the level of Verstehen and the level of Befindlichkeit in hearing what the other.
Thank you for both of your comments. As I mentioned, this is my first sort of not my. I'll start like this. When I was younger, I was going into the mountains with my father, and he said once, a couple of times, he said that sometimes in order to go forward, you have to make a step backward. And since I'm sort of like lost between thematics, and I was thinking maybe I could return to this theme of voice, and that's why I took this sort of to see where. So this is an attempt to try to this is more like a formulation of a task, in a sense, of what are some of the complexes that come to when you try to address the question of voice, that come to mind. And I was, in this sense, I was precisely trying to play at, sort of try to think together both aspects of, so this let's say maybe just the language aspect of voice, and the other one that's the one that sort of like let's say the existential one, which could be called somewhat poetically so the aspect of breath, which brings me so. And I was trying to sort of try to make sense out of how are these things, how are they combined when I try to listen to a voice. But I'm not in the clear at all. But it seems to me when I mentioned the recorded voice, and I was thinking, can a recording, even though you will hear on the recording also the trembling in the voice, the tone of voice, even maybe the feelings behind the voice, but that will have already erased that aspect of where it came from, in the sense that, so in this sense I was speaking about, there is something haunting about it, because it's like something that eludes me as soon as it eludes me. That's pretty much all I can say. That I tried to get there, but fail miserably. But we are all, in a sense, winning through this failure. Hopefully. Dragan, please, before I start.
Thank you, Andrej, for your lecture. If I may say so, Gentile lecture addressed with a Gentile voice. But nevertheless, my first comment would be on your thesis about existential character of the voice, and I immediately recall the Stoics' concept of the soul, which included the voice. The only one I knew ever, and it could be useful to elaborate a bit more in terms of it was like multi-layered concept of the soul, with 5 senses, with sexuality, with voice, and with hegemon like mind. And it could be useful to let's say to include that kind of what they wanted to say through that the voice is one of the most basic marks of the soul. It could be useful. And the second thing, I think that you mentioned that concept of lateral is a Walther's concept. I don't think so. That's concept of Maurice Merleau-Ponty, and Walther studied by Maurice Merleau-Ponty. Maurice Merleau-Ponty spoke about a lateral universality, which is not encompassing universality. It's not logical universality, but universality which consists of several various perspectives, and not usual perspectives, but perspectives as outsiders in that term, which are combined together like in kind of lateral universalities.
Thank you both for both remarks. I will make thank you very much for the Stoics. Just recently I read a book. It's on the hermeneutics and the voice of the other, but it was precisely there was a notion when they sort of like the author equated psyche, the Greek term of psyche, with voice. So it was something new to me. So it goes in the same direction, I think. And The other one, yeah, of course, Waldenfels was a student of Merleau-Ponty, so, but he takes this notion of the way I understand Waldenfels, he takes it as just this indirectness, yeah, yeah. So it's so, yeah, in the sense of letting yourself be addressed by and then trying to approach what addresses you, but you can never grasp it. Yeah, directly. Marco.
Little question. Your opinion about the classic criticism of Derrida about voice. The voice is and remains phonocentric, so it's an egocentric. So just your opinion about this classic criticism. And second, what you say about human voice maintains the same value if we speak if we consider technical voice as an Alexa or something like that.
Yeah. Thank you. So the first one was the phonocent, this Derridian critique. In this sense, again, I sort of follow Waldenfels, who sort of when speaking of voice, he also, of course, touches upon this Derridian and. Maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's too much of an interpretation on my part, but I would seem that that as I mentioned that sort of like voice is in itself is always decentered, so how can I put it? If try to put it as succinctly as possible. Phone is not phonocentric, something like that. So yeah, that would be like a kind of formula. But of course, that would require much more elaborate discussion. Just what was the other thing?
Alexa.
Oh yeah, Alexa. Yeah, I was sort of like thinking the same thing when I mentioned the recorded voice. It's like taking something out of the middle of the 20th century. And I thought, about AI generated voice?
There was a dispute with Scarlett Johansson. I see the use of her voice in her. The ChatGPT has took the voice of Scarlett Johansson, and she sued them to do not use my voice.
Yeah.
Because they had asked her if she wanted to do it, and she had said no. And they created a voice that is exactly like hers, even if it's not based on hers. And so she sued them.
But yeah, my contention would that be, it's an AI generated voice. It's not a voice in reality. I think, in the sense it's sort of like it's a voice that sort of like that fakes to be a voice, in a sense. It's not. I don't know. But
you called it voice.
Huh?
You called it voice.
Yeah.
It is.
Because it has
voice.
It has the semblance of a voice.
Real semblance.
That would be better, maybe. The semblance of a voice.
You
Yeah.
cannot distinguish empirically.
That's the point.
Finally, you will not be able to distinguish the human voice from the artificial voice
Except by the person who's speaking. A voice that has no, it's
Body.
yeah.
Is that what's missing, the body?
In a sense, yeah. But that's what.
I will link that with the topic on testimony. There is a process in the, I don't know in what museum, to generate on AI technology the hologram of survivors. And you as a visitor, you are the kids or this putting question, and the EI produced the voice and the holograms of that person who was recorded with 200 cameras and can generate. So you can. Were you afraid? Yes, I was afraid.
Yeah, but
hologram starts to.
that is like that.
It's post-humanism, post-testimony, post everything.
Yeah, it's.
But it's also reality. I mean, it's not. If reality is not post, it's now.
It's now, but it's overcoming everything we are accustomed to or are habituated to.
No, but the point is, if I don't know that is Alexa speaking, and could I get feeling about that? I mean, and that was. I mean, I don't know the answer, but this is the real world now. It's not post anymore. In a sense, it happens right now.
Yeah.
And it's a big question because if we have feeling, if we can have feelings with two machines.
I'm not disputing that we live in a very, very terrifying world when this will be, when it, perhaps it already is completely impossible to distinguish the AI generated stuff from the real stuff, if there is something that is real. One hope for my part would be that maybe through this contemplation on the voice and breath, and maybe we could, take into account that one shred of humanity that will remain somehow, hopefully. But there were two more questions. Dan, you wanted to ask something?
Just a short question. You have occupied yourself a lot with Gadamer and Derrida, grammatology and Humanities. And I have understand your lesson as some kind of critic on Derrida's notion of phonocentrism. This, if we take this position, then is the whole experience of inter-vocality or responsivity. If you use this word of Walther, or responsibility, not possible.
In what sense? Why?
So that the concentration, or how to say, on the voice, this is the question of the whole philosophical experience, starting with Socrates. So Derrida has a big, so to say, interpretation or deconstruction of the whole history of philosophy on the this phonocentrism or logocentrism, but is some way different as your position.
Thank you. That is, I mean, that is something I would. I would say maybe like this. Derrida's invectives, as much as they give us to think against the history of the whole metaphysics, and they have their undisputed relevance, and of course Derrida. I noticed how much he influenced my thought, and also when I was editing his book on Shibboleth, on Paul Celan, I noticed how much of myself I recognize in him, or how much was my meager attempts at Paul Celan were already pre-indicated, or how could I put it, in Derrida. But nonetheless, as no philosopher, his word is also not the final word. So yeah, it is how to let's again, if I try to put it in a formula, but again, this is so very, very, very tentative, very to go beyond Derrida with Derrida or through Derrida. Yeah. So that would be like the hope or the intention. So thank you. And maybe we take one more question, then we can have a little break.
Yeah. I'm sorry to stay with Derrida, but just because I understand perfectly the expression you use, namely phone paradoxically is not phonocentric. I think that's what Giorgio Agamben was arguing, like in 1982 in Language and Death, namely that the phone itself is haunted, as you say, and I think the hauntedness comes from the fact that once you define language as a meaningful voice, as an intended voice, as a willing voice, or willed voice, namely, once you define language as a difference between a signifier with a certain signification, it's at that point that you have always lost the voice, because the phone as the material, and you speak of breath, the material expression is always already lost. And we go back also to the question of the difference between Befindlichkeit and Verstehen. It's like, once you focus on the Verstehen, once you have added that side, you have always lost the voice. And that's why the phone is not phonocentric, according to Agamben. The problem is writing, and he goes into all of that. And that's why I agree that it's super interesting to look at the Stoics as well, because their psyche is material, and they're saying voice is just another material expression, which is really, really fascinating. So I understand. I think phone is not phonocentric is a great slogan or title for it. But it's also one has to then deal with the rest of the Western tradition. So
of course. Then thank you. I have nothing more to add. I hope I will have something more to add in time, but I would like to work on this what has been sort of like, and it's it gives one reassurance to hear that there are so many sympathetic voices to be heard also coming from the audience. So thank you very much.